Hello everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the new Folk of the Feywild playtest material. First thing you'll note is they've set it up a lot like the last one, Gothic Lineages, where they tell you about everything your character gets in general before we get to the actual specific material. Most of it's still the same. You still get to speak and write Common and one other language. And you get to increase your ability scores. Now this is where things get slightly different. You still have the option to increase one score by 2 and a different score by 1. Or there's a new option where you can increase 3 different scores by 1. I don't think we've seen that before. I think it's always been the +2 and +1 option. This would be kind of nice because I know there's times where I feel like I'm playing a class where I want to balance multiple stats at once. Some are pretty straightforward. It's like, this is your most important stat. Others, it's like, okay, you got to juggle these two. And others, it's like, okay, we have a couple of stats to choose from, and you might need, more than 2. Like if I'm playing a paladin, I know I need charisma, pretty sure I need wisdom, and then because I like to play them tanky, it's like, well, it'd be nice to get a little more constitution in there as well. So this is a good option to sort of, if your character is going to be spread out a little bit more, I like it because I think it gives you a little bit more flexibility in assigning ability scores. So I'm happy about that. It'll be great to see if they keep that going forward, or if it's something that they're just testing out for this one, decide maybe we need to take that out. But I'm hoping they keep it. Now, fairies are, pretty standard fairies. They're bigger than pixies and sprites, which they need to specify because those would be, your tiny, diminutive creatures. And they have special characteristics from being exposed to the Feywild, like most of the stuff in here. We're used to the Feywild being this magical place that sort of, I don't know if warps is exactly the right word, because that sounds a little more evil or dangerous. Well, to be fair, the Feywild is a pretty dangerous place, but I guess it works. It sort of warps things are in it and around it, and it's a very magical place. So this includes the fairies. They give examples of fairies having insect-like wings, shimmering multicolored skin, really big ears, being surrounded by a glittering mist, a spectral unicorn horn, perpetually clean hands, smelling like brownies. That would actually be kind of nice. But I assume my character would get as hungry as I would if I had to smell brownies all day. Or for the more emo inclined among us, like high school version of me, a noticeable but harmless chill. You can always come up with others. These are some interesting examples, but the idea here is that the Feywild has, in some way, made your character a little bit more magical. Not necessarily in any mechanical way, just obviously there's this Feywild influence. Now, mechanically, you are a small creature, and you are a Fey subtype. I think we've had, fairies or other small creatures before that were tiny in previous editions. I think they've decided that for balance purposes, they're going to be small here, and I get that. You get into issues with having to do different armor classes or attack rolls or whatever, when you have a smaller than that creature. So I can see having maybe a little bit bigger fairy than maybe you were originally planning, just to keep things convenient and sort of the same across the board. That's not to say maybe your character isn't still really tiny and it just happens to be small mechanically. I think that's technically an option. But the idea is, you're still going to be sort of in line with everything else. You don't have to do anything special with your armor or weapons to make them fit your character. As a fairy, you will have a flight speed equal to your walking speed, and you can hover. And you have a 30-foot walking speed. You get the Druidcraft and Fairy Fire spells. You'll notice it says specifically that you can cast Fairy Fire once per long rest without expending the spell slot. But it doesn't say anything about Druidcraft. That's because Druidcraft is a cantrip. If you want to take a look at it real quick, 5e Tools is a great site for when you have to look something up. Like if I'm DMing, instead of looking through my books, I will actually just pop in here, type it out real quick, and find it without having to waste too much of my player's time. It is a pretty standard utility type spell. Nothing really fancy. It's a lot of your sensory stuff like you would get with, say, a wizard's prestidigitation. Druidcraft lets you make a harmless sensory effect, either just a regular sensory effect like you would with some of your other spells, or one that predicts the weather for the next 24 hours, which is kind of cool. You can make a flower blossom, a seed pod open, or a leaf bud bloom. You never know when that might come in handy. I know in my current campaign, my players are looking for a flower, or they will be tomorrow whenever we game. And if I had a druid that I knew had druidcraft, it might conveniently be a flower that needs to blossom that hasn't. Okay, I should probably check to see if my player actually has druidcraft, because that would actually be fun now that I think about it. I'm going to slip this in here as a quick little aside. I took a look, and the druid in my group does in fact have druidcraft. So it'll be fun to make that slight change in my notes. My players will probably never know, because I'm sure they don't pay attention to any of these. But it's fun, and it gives you a good example of why it can be helpful to actually read through a bunch of these materials that get put out, because you never know when something might give you an idea, even if it's something small and insignificant. Giving that particular player, who is generally a little on the shyer side, an opportunity to have, one of their moments, even if it's a little minor. I'm going to make this really important plot flower bloom. I mean, that's still a little something you can do for them. So I think it's important, or at least it's good, to sort of read through a lot of this stuff. And, it may not seem like a big deal to you guys, but I think my player is just going to absolutely love it. Or you can snuff out a candle, torch, or a small campfire, which is another, one of those things that gets tacked on to a couple of these spells. But it's fairy fire that, I guess, is the one that might have a little bit more impact in terms of combat and things like that. That's why you can use it once per day without using a spell slot. It'll use your intelligence, wisdom, or charisma. And then I think this is one of those where, well, you can still use it otherwise. Yeah. You can also cast this spell using any spell slots you have. So if, you are a spell-casting character, you can still use your spell slots to cast it. It's like you have it prepared or ready or whatever. But you can still use it once per day for free on top of that. And it outlines objects and creatures that fail a dexterity saving throw, at least, within a 20-foot cube in light. And anything that's outlined in light will shed dim light. So if you attack a creature that's affected by this and has their little outline going, attack rolls against those affected creatures or against affected objects will have advantage if the attacker can see it, because it's practically outlined for you. And affected creatures or objects can't benefit from being invisible. I guess he goes invisible, but you can still see the outline of it. Finally, they're still sort of playing up to that, fairies are tiny thing, by giving them Fey passage, which says that you can squeeze through a space as narrow as 1 inch wide. So it's one of those where you'll have to ask your DM, how big is the space? Can I squeeze in it? And they'll say yes or no. But it's great for sort of sneaking in and out, and sort of reaffirms the idea that, even if they are a small category creature, fairies are, we have them in our head that they're these really tiny things. Next, we have Hobgoblins. They have a sort of Feywild variant on it. And if you're not real familiar with Hobgoblins, we have a picture of them right here. So this is your regular goblin, this is your hobgoblin, and this is a bugbear, which I know doesn't say goblin in the name, but it's still in the goblin family. And normally we think of these as sort of like the goblins are your, your disposable runt enemies or whatever. Bugbears are nice and tough. Hobgoblins are somewhere in the middle. They might be sort of like elite goblins, or they might be a little magical in nature. But Wizards of the Coast is trying to move away from this idea of monstrous races. The idea that a race can be good or bad. They want it to be like, okay, all these races can be good, and we want to show you that there's good races of every kind. In fact, I think they even made a point, to try to use race less as far as like the word goes. So that's why we have Feyfolk, and I'm seeing that a lot in sort of an RPG community in general. I think they've decided that there's a negative connotation to race. They're trying to come up with other words. We still see them talking about race in here in D&D, so I don't think we were quite, not that far away. But we see other games talking about lineages or ancestries and things like that. But the Hobgoblins, these are ones that have origins in the Feywild, and they are going to channel an aspect of the Feywild called the Rule of Reciprocity, which creates a bond between the giver and receiver of a gift. So we have a bunch of hobgoblins that are giving each other gifts, and they get these sort of close-knit communities as a result. They describe them, a little bit. They're a little taller than regular goblins, still smaller than bugbears. They note that they have curved, pointy ears and noses that change colors with emotion. They give a couple examples. I think it was like red or blue, but honestly, if I'm going to play a hobgoblin, I would want a full-on mood ring nose. I realize that would make things like lying or bluff, deception, whatever, a little bit harder, but at the same time, that would just be fun to play with. I'd have to actually look up a list of those old school mood rings. I don't know if those are still a thing. I'm sure someone out there knows what I'm talking about, though. Mechanically, they are a medium humanoid. That's pretty standard and pretty in line with how they've always been. With a 30-foot walking speed, they've got your standard 60-foot dark vision. They have Fey ancestry, which gives them advantage on saving throws versus charmed. Again, pretty standard for Fey creatures. Then we get to something interesting. If you go back and look at the Gothic lineage video I did, you'll notice that they put in a lot of stuff referring to doing things a number of times per day equal to your proficiency bonus. And it looks like they've decided they like that because they've brought this back here. So the Fey gift. Hobgoblins, to sort of play up that giver-receiver angle, can use the help action as a bonus action a number of times equal to their proficiency bonus. Okay, so if you're not familiar with proficiency bonuses, you start off with a proficiency bonus of +2, and your proficiency bonus lasts at that level for 4 levels. So 1 through 4, it's a +2, 5 through 8, it's +3, and so on. So at level 1, it's saying that you can use the help action as a bonus action twice per day, and then you get it back after you take a long rest. It has an extra benefit at 3rd level, or starting at 3rd level, where you get to choose one of the following options. We have Hospitality, Passage, and Spite. Hospitality gives you and the target a number of temporary hit points equal to 1d6 plus your proficiency bonus. So at 1st level, you'd be getting 1d6 plus 2 temporary hit points whenever you use the help action. You have the Passage option, which increases the walking speed of you and the target by 10 feet until the start of your next turn. Or you have the Spite option. So until your next turn, the first time the target hits a creature with an attack, the attacked creature has disadvantage on their next attack roll, assuming they make it within the next minute, but that's usually how it works in combat. I would like to note, however, that all of these are in regards to taking the help action, not as a bonus action. In fact, it even states it in here, whether as a bonus action or an action. So twice per day, you get these bonuses for free, but you can still use the regular help action, and you'll still get your Hospitality, Passage, or Spite option. Personally, I tend to play support characters, so I like Hospitality and Passage. I like that they have a Spite option, One, because it's nice to have something more combat oriented, even if I would probably still prefer to use, temporary hit points or speed bonuses. But mostly, I am an incredibly petty person, so I like the idea of helping someone out of spite. I wish I could say I have a better, more personable, likable reason, but no, I like the idea that we can help people out of spite. Finally, they have Fortune from the Many, which again is playing up on that idea of these, large connected communities of hobgoblins. It says if you miss with an attack or fail an ability check or saving throw, you can tap into those bonds of reciprocity and gain a bonus to the roll equal to the number of allies you can see within 30 feet of you, with a max bonus of +5. So you can't just say, hey, I bought a couple of pizzas for the local adventuring college, so now I've got 200 of my closest friends with me. Let's load up that super powerful but incredibly inaccurate weapon and do a cult shot. No. Okay, you get a limit to it, and it's a pretty reasonable limit. And you can get that bonus a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus for a short rest. So generally, you're going to get the option to add that bonus twice per day at first level. And assuming you have a party of like 4 or 5 people, that's a good +3 or +4 on your roll. That can really make a difference. Obviously, that's going to benefit people in larger groups a little bit more than smaller groups. If you're playing at a table with 7 or 8 people, it's a lot easier to have a full 5 of those at least in, within 30 feet of you in sight. And if you're playing with a group of just 3 people, for example, it's a lot harder to really get that, worthwhile bonus, but you could still manage to pull it off. Next, we have Owlfolk. They come in a variety of shapes and sizes, just like, actual owls. When we think of owls, we think of nocturnal creatures with really good eyesight. So these owls may or may not be a nocturnal. They could just be night owls, and yes, they actually say night owls in there. They actually play up that pun. But they have magical Fey eyesight. That's how they've been touched by the Feywild. They have the ability to see the magic of their surroundings. So they're going to be medium or small humanoids with a 30-foot walking speed. And they have dark vision, but I want to point out that they have a 90-foot dark vision. You compare that to the Hobgoblin, which is your standard 60-foot dark vision. So this is a little bit better dark vision than most creatures normally get. I don't know if we have anything else that gets 90 dark vision off the top of my head. I'd probably have to go through and look at it. But other than that, it's still the same. It's like you see dim light as if it was bright light. You see darkness as if it was dim light. You see gray instead of colors. It's the exact same as the regular dark vision, except it's an extra 30 feet longer. They have magic sight, which lets them cast detect magic, but only as a ritual. So you don't get a free detect magic once per day, that a spell slot type of deal like you do with, say, Fairy Fire that we covered. You just get the detect magic spell that you can cast as a ritual, but if you're also a spellcaster, you can cast it with your normal spell casting slots. You count it as knowing the spell. It's just that outside of using your spell slots, you can only cast it as a ritual. And again, you get to choose your intelligence, wisdom, or charisma for that. They also get an actual flight speed, and it's going to be equal to their walking speed. So without anything else benefiting their walking speed, they have a 30-foot fly speed. And when they fall, they can use a reaction to make a dexterity saving throw with DC 10 to stop falling and fly in place until the start of your next turn. I want to compare that to the Aarakocra, or other major flying race, who have a bit of a faster fly speed. They can fly 50 feet, but they can't be wearing medium or heavy armor when they do. So as a Owlfolk, you don't necessarily have that restriction. I mean, you can be an Owlfolk fighter or paladin and be fully armored up and still be able to fly. So it opens up a little bit more options for flying races for certain classes. Though there's still going to be, I guess, a temptation to play Aarakocra if you're not a medium or heavy, armor class, because then you get to fly for 50 feet. You don't necessarily get that fall option, but I can see how that's going to be, tempting. And a lot of people, I think, are really eyeing that Owl Folk over the Aarakocra now, but we'll have to see how that turns out. Finally, you have Proficiency in the Stealth skill. First off, I want to point out that's one of the differences between the Owl Folk and the Aarakocra. Owl Folk can wear heavier armor, but that's usually gives you a penalty to your stealth checks. Or if you're trying to be sneaky, yeah, you're probably going to be in light armor, in which case, you don't necessarily get that extra 20-foot benefit that a stealthy Aarakocra would, but you do get the free proficiency in the stealth skill. I also like to remind you that if you've been keeping up with Miss Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, you can trade out, proficiencies. So if you decide you do want to be a heavily armored character, and you're not really going to be sneaking around all that much, you can actually trade the stealth skill proficiency or proficiency in a different skill. We covered that, I think, in the Tasha's Cauldron of Everything video, where they have sort of that hierarchy where if a class gives you certain proficiencies, you can sort of trade them out because they want to tie the racial benefits more to cultural things than anything else. So it might not, maybe you don't really come from the stealthy type of Owlfolk. And they're like, okay, well, we don't want to push you into being a stealthy Owlfolk. So if you would rather have athletics or something instead, you can do that. Finally, we have the Rabbit Folk, which I think of really fast creatures jumping all over the place, and I think they kind of sort of played into the same thing. Rabbit folk embody the spirit of freedom and travel and are full of energy. They are blessed with a little fey luck, which is likely a reference to the whole lucky rabbit's foot thing. So I think people have sort of a very specific idea of rabbits, especially in fantasy. I'm thinking tortoise in the hare, for example. And I think they're really playing into that pretty well. At first, it looks like, well, maybe they're not, but then when we keep going, you see that they really are. Because they have a walking speed of 30, and I'm thinking, well, that's kind of slow. But we'll see how that gets a little faster when we get down to Rabbit Hot. They are a medium or small humanoid, so you can be a little rabbit or a big rabbit. You add your proficiency bonus to your initiative rolls, and I think that's where we're getting a part of our these rabbits are fast type of thing. Because in this case, it's, well, they're reacting fast. So they're getting a +2 initiative, basically, at first level. You have proficiency in the perception skill, which again, just like when we talked about with the Owlfolk, you can trade that out for a different skill if you would prefer. They have lucky footwork. Whenever you fail a dexterity saving throw, you can use a reaction to roll a d4 and add it to the result. So you do have to use up your reaction, and it's not necessarily a big bonus, and it's not a scaling bonus either. It's not like, okay, you get a d4 now, and when you get a higher level, you can add a d6 instead. No, it's a small bonus, but it's one that you can use repeatedly, so that's understandable. And finally, this is where I think we get the rest of the rabbit speed. You get the rabbit hop. Once during each of your turns, when you walk at least 5 feet, and you have to, have a speed greater than 0, so you can't use the hop itself to go that 5 feet. Whenever you walk at least 5 feet, you can hop, rolling a d12 and moving that many feet in a direction of your choice. Also doesn't necessarily specify that it has to be on a two-dimensional plane, so I can see maybe using this to hop up onto objects or walls or whatever. But that basically means that you have a variable walking speed between 31 and 42, assuming that you're someplace where you can hop. Which is, I guess, an interesting and a very rabbity way to go about it. If you're one of those 40k Age of Sigmar fans where you're used to having to roll for distance on your charges, I feel like this is going to be one of those races that really appeals to you because I can just see them, trying to run and literally hop as part of their charge to really get up into someone's face. But I also know that maybe I've just played too much Final Fantasy, maybe I've just heard too many people on the internet. I just know that I'm thinking of something like cute and cuddly and furry, and what's most likely going to happen is I'm going to get a player that's going to pop up with something like this or a Playboy bunny type of thing, rather than, furry little creature. But maybe I'll be wrong. That said, I think that's all for the races that we've added today. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to leave a comment, like, subscribe, that would be great. If not, that's okay too. I understand. Either way, I hope you have an awesome day, and I will catch you next time.